Good afternoon. So now comes the time when I have to, thank you. Hardest time of the day for a speaker to speak to a group of people. Because you have eaten and are full, and now it's time to go Betty bye. I understand. But I'm going to try to keep your attention. It's kind of open-ended today as far as how long we're going to go. I realize that today is a time that people would like to be home and resting and things like that, or doing whatever you do. But we'll just kind of play it by ear. There are several things that I want to make sure that we talk about today. And depending on how much we elaborate, will depend on how many people are in the back going. So anyway, go to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Devarim chapter 1. And while you're turning over there, you should know that the book of Deuteronomy is more or less a retelling of the story of Israel and their departure from Egypt and all the things that happened along the way to bring them up until the time that they were about to enter into the land. And when Moses is speaking to this other generation, the second generation, children and grandchildren of the people that left Egypt, he speaks to them as if they were the ones that left Egypt. If they were the ones that were at Mount Sinai, and if they were the ones that complained and murmured, etc., etc. So I say that because I want to suggest that Moses' words are not just for that generation of 3,500 years ago, but Moses' words are for you and me today. If we are Israel, if we are his people grafted into that cultivated olive tree, then according to Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it is all our fathers who passed under the cloud, who went into the sea, etc. Not his fathers, but our fathers. So Deuteronomy chapter 1, speaking to us, verse 6, it says, "The Lord our God spoke to us in Horeb, saying, You have dwelt long enough at this mountain. Turn and take your journey, and go to the mountains of the Amorim, to all the neighboring places in the plain, in the mountains and in the lowland, in the south and on the seacoast, to the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them." So very quickly in these two verses, several things we could talk about, but I want to kind of condense it for the sake of time. Number one, there was a reason that they were to go to Sinai. And that specifically was to receive the Torah, to receive those instructions and those commandments. But backing up a little bit, when they first came out of Egypt, and we may have talked about this the last time I was here, I don't recall, but when they first came out of Egypt in Exodus 13, there's two verses, in verse 17 and 18, that describe them as coming out of Egypt fully armed. You arm yourself for battle. You arm yourself for war. But he saw that even though they were fully armed, if they were to have seen war by going directly into the land of Canaan, that they would have wanted to turn around and go back to Egypt. So what that tells us is that outwardly they may have looked as if they were an army, but inwardly they were still slaves. At the very sight of war, they're going to want to go back, turn around, and go back to Egypt and reduce themselves to being slaves once again. So he doesn't lead them directly into the land of Canaan. He takes them by the way of the Red Sea. That was supposed to happen. They weren't ready to go straight from Egypt into the land of Canaan. Ladies, those of you who have given birth, why does the Creator design it that you conceive, but you have to go through 40 weeks of pregnancy before you deliver? Because you wouldn't be prepared physically, mentally, emotionally to go from conception one day to delivery in just 10, 11 days. That's how long it would have taken them to get into Egypt, or get into Canaan from Egypt. So you have to go through the process of conceiving, going through the morning sickness, the swelling ankles, the cravings, the hot flashes, the hormonal changes, the stretchy pants, the Braxton Hicks contractions, and all that kind of thing that you go through during that pregnancy. Because I believe that in part what those discomforts and that suffering that goes along with being pregnant does, it conditions you. It conditions you mentally, physically, emotionally for what's coming ahead. Because imagine not going through those things and then going straight to delivery. Because would I be wrong in thinking that when you get to around week 35, 36, 37 like that, and you're eating your dinner off your belly, that you're thinking, I'll be glad when this baby gets here? Am I right, ladies? I mean, isn't that why you walk around Walmart? You know, and take Jeep rides and do all that kind of stuff? You want to get this process going because you're ready for this to be behind you, right? So all of those discomforts were designed, in part anyway, to bring you to the state of mind that I'm ready. I'm ready for this to happen. Well, likewise, he doesn't bring them right out of Egypt and take them directly into the land of Canaan. They weren't ready for it, because if they had seen war, if they had seen, oh, this is going to be tough, I'm just going to go back to Egypt. So he brings them by the way of the Red Sea. Oh, by the way, when he brought them out of Egypt, it was the splitting of the Red Sea. You know what that is? It's your water breaking. I have called my son out of Egypt. Egypt was kind of the womb where the child developed, because they went down as 70, Jacob and those 70 that were with him. They went down as 70, they came out as 2 to 3 million people. So they multiplied, they grew, they were fruitful in Egypt, which is the womb. But when the time was up, when it was time for the womb to let go, he called his son out of Egypt. And so he split the waters. Emblematic of the waters breaking is that child is about to be born. By the way, if the baby was to stay in the womb past that time, what's going to happen to the baby? It's going to die. So all of these things are to say that he had to bring them to Mount Sinai, because he had to prepare them to go into the land. Now, when he brought them to Mount Sinai, and he gave them the Torah, and he gave them the commandments, and all the different statutes that they were to live by, well, they had to learn those things. They had to internalize those things. They had been slaves for a number of years. They had been in Egypt for 210 years. So they had to internalize these things. I'll liken that to those of us who have come into the realization that in Messiah, our identity is Israel, and as his people Israel, that we have an obligation and a responsibility to live a certain way. We keep his Sabbaths. We keep his feast days. We don't eat certain things that we used to eat. We do certain things that we didn't used to do, etc. And we have to internalize these things. And as we internalize these things, we have to discuss these things. And sometimes as we discuss these things, I get an opinion about this, and you get an opinion about that. And before you know it, we're no longer discussing these things. We're in each other's face about these things. And some of you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And we end up fussing and feuding and fighting. I probably shouldn't say this, but in the quote-unquote Messianic community, there are debates about everything from how you pronounce the name. Is it Yahweh? Is it Yahweh? Is it Jehovah? Is it Yahuwah? Is it Yehoah? And you can find different camps that will argue all day and all night about why they're right. Or the name of the Messiah, Yeshua, Yahshua, Yehoshua, Yeshua, and on and on and on and on. And again, you'll find people who will argue why they're right and you're wrong. Or when a new moon is. Is it the sliver? Is it the conjunction? Some people say it's the full moon. And on we go. One of the times that I spoke here a few years ago, it was Yom Kippur. And the day before, I had been at another congregation, Archie Honeycutt at Maim Chaim, and they were observing Yom Kippur. And the day after I was here, there were people who were observing on Monday Yom Kippur. So I was talking during the time, Archie was telling me about he had people that were going to observe Yom Kippur on Saturday, some were going to do it on Sunday, and some were going to do it on Monday. And he was going to have to fast all 3 days. So we get into this situation when, as we're internalizing these things, because we want to do what's right, and we get opinions, and those opinions become dogma, and guess what we end up doing? The very thing we used to do over here, when we coming out of all that stuff we used to do, we end up doing the very same thing. So there come a point in time that through Moses, God told Israel, you've been at this mountain long enough. Let me put it to you this way. You've been at this place where you're debating and discussing and internalizing these things long enough. Now has come the time to take your journey and to put these things into action. Walk them out. Put them to the use that they were intended for. Because God never gave it to them or to us to sit around talking and discussing and that be the end of it. No, He gave these things, these statutes and ordinances to us for us to do them, for us to put them into action, to appropriate them into our lives as individuals every day, not just on Shabbat, not just in a meeting like this, not just at the feast days, but every day to live these things. So He says, now take your journey and go to the land. Now, second part of this is, why did God, first of all, decide that He wanted to have a people and give them land? I mean, did He just say, I want to give you, Abraham, your seed, a piece of land so that you can build a nice house, plant a field, plant a vineyard, and live happily ever after? Was that the extent of it? No, I don't think so. There was a grander purpose in all of those things. Second question in conjunction with the first, why did He deed the land of Canaan to Abraham and to his seed? Why that piece of land? What was the reason behind it? What was the purpose of it? And so here, after kind of thinking on this, here's something that this is an opinion, but this is kind of what I concluded. I want you to notice, if you look on a map, find Israel where it is on that map, and you will see that Israel is in the midst of the nations. In other words, Israel is not in some far corner over here, on the edge of the map over here, or it's not on the edge of the map over here, but look at it, it's in the midst. It's almost right in the middle. In fact, the rabbis believe that Israel is the center of the world, Jerusalem being the center of Israel, the Temple Mount being the center of Jerusalem, and the Even HaShetiyah, the foundation stone of the Temple Mount, where the Ark of the Covenant sat, is the center of the Temple Mount. But the point is Israel's at the center. It's in the middle. It's in the midst. It's in a very conspicuous place. You are a city set upon a hill. And a city set upon a hill insinuates it's in a very conspicuous place where everybody can see it, including your enemies. What is Israel surrounded by today? Its enemies. Now that's all around them on the north, on the east, and on the south. Of course, to the west is the Mediterranean Sea. Does anybody know what Mediterranean means, by the way? Middle Earth. It's in the midst of the earth. When Jacob adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, he said, let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So my point is, the Creator deeded a land to Abraham and to his seed where they would be in the midst of the earth. They would be in the middle of the earth, in the midst of the nations. They would be in a very conspicuous place. They wouldn't be in some far or remote place, cut off and isolated from the rest of the world, but they would be in the midst of the nations so that they could fulfill their mandate. And what was that? To be a light to the nations. Because what are you to do with your light? Hide it under a bed? Put it under a bushel? Or you put it on the lampstand? And why? Because you want everybody to see it, not just your friends. And why is that? It doesn't say that for God so loved the Messianics, for God so loved the Baptists, for God so loved the Pentecostals, but God loved what? The world, that He gave His only begotten Son. That's how important it was that the Word would become flesh and dwell among us, because He loved the world that much. So that love and concern for those people who are in darkness has not been extinguished. It's still valid today. And so the point I'm trying to make here is, from the beginning we see that He determined that His people would be in the midst of the nations, so that they could be a light to the nations. And He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so what is our mandate? To be a light to the nations. The seed of Abraham is to be the source of blessing for all the nations on the earth. When Abram was called out of Ur of the Chaldean, which is Babylon, he was called out of Babylon. to walk a set-apart life. You and I are called to be set apart. But we are not called to be set apart for the sake of being set apart. We are called to be set apart for the sake of being a source of blessing for all the nations on the earth. If it was all about just being set apart, if that was the end game, and for my Messianic brothers, if it was all just about invoking Hebrew names, Hebrew terms, and putting tzitzit on our belt loops, if that's all it was about, all we would be able to do is say we're different. But it's not about that. It's about walking a set-apart life so that we can be a source of blessing to all the nations on the earth. We were called, all of us, out of the world to walk a set-apart life so that we can be a light to those who have not. Abram was called out of Babylon. And notice, when he calls him out of Babylon, he didn't just put him in some far remote place and say, now you just stay there and only see like-minded people. No. He led him to the land of Canaan. And he deposited him in the land of Canaan. Now, who was living in the land of Canaan at that point in time? Canaanites. That was a real hard one, wasn't it? Canaanites. And what kind of people were the Canaanites? Let's put it this way. How many times in Scripture does God tell Israel to wipe out all the Egyptians? Not once. How many times does he tell them to wipe out the Babylonians? Doesn't. Grecians? Persians? Romans? Never. And yet when Israel comes into the land of Canaan, what does he tell Yehoshua and the children of Israel to do? To wipe them out. That's what kind of people we're talking about. And yet God brings Abram out of Babylon, the very epitome of what you and I as believers stand against, Babylon. He brought him out of that to bring him into Canaan, surrounded by Canaanites, such vile people that God would have his descendants totally eradicate them. Why did God bring Abram out of Babylon to deposit him amongst the Canaanites? For God so loved. Because the cup of the Amorites was not yet full. And so obviously he placed Abram there, called him out of Babylon to walk a set-apart life so that he would be a source of light to those people who were then dwelling in Canaan. So that they could have an opportunity to see the distinction between light and darkness, between holy and profane. So once again, we're not called to be set apart just so we can say we're different. We're not called to be set apart so that we can isolate ourselves and be set apart in that regard. We're called to be set apart so that we can be a light, so that we can be a source of blessing. And again, where was this to emanate from? The midst of the nations. You can't be a light if you're running and hiding that light from people. Agreed? This side of the room? All right. So now, let me kind of underscore this. Look in chapter 2 with me. They're preparing to come into the land. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. What's this got to do with Esau, Martha? Well, we're going to get to that. You have to. We can't go directly into the land. We got to go by the way of the Red Sea. All right. All right. So verse 4, chapter 2. Command the people, saying, you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully. Do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land. No, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. Skipping down to verse 9. Then the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab, nor contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession, because I have given the honor to the descendants of Lot as a possession. Let's go over to verse 19. And when you come near the people of Ammon, do not harass them or meddle with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession. So here are three nations, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, that as Israel is coming into the land, they are not to harass them, they're not to meddle with them, they're not to try to take any of their land. Leave them alone. But continue to read in chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, you will see that Israel is also going to encounter Sihon, the king of Heshbon. They're going to encounter Og, the king of Bashan. And Moses sent out a peace, an offer of peace to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, but he rejected it. And here's what God says: I've delivered them into your hand. Go destroy them, possess their land, possess their cities. The same is true for Og, the king of Bashan. So they destroyed them, they possessed their land, and they possessed their cities. Thus the question: why is it that the Creator was so adamant, don't harass Edom, Moab, and Ammon, but wipe out the king of Heshbon and his people, possess their land, the king of Bashan and his people, and possess their land? Well, the latter is obviously going to be a problem for Israel if they were allowed to stay. Just like later on, the Canaanites, the inhabitants, are going to be a problem for the children of Israel if they let them stay, if they make treaties with them. They would be a thorn in their side constantly. So it's best just to go ahead and take care of them. But later on in history, don't we see that Edom, Moab, and Ammon are also going to be antagonists toward Israel and be a thorn in their side as well? And the Creator knows that. He's not surprised by that. He knows all things from the beginning. So why does He tell them, wipe them out, leave them alone? I'll give you my opinion. Because over in chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, verse 5, it says, surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Therefore, be careful to observe them. For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon Him? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day? Bill's translation: when you get into the land, that's where you're supposed to be. And then when you get into the land, you live according to the instructions that were given to you at Sinai or Horeb. That's what you're supposed to do. So when you're where you're supposed to be and you're doing what you are supposed to do, then the nations round about you are going to see how distinct you are from them. This is your wisdom. So you're where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing. The nations are going to take notice of that. And when they start taking notice of the fact that you're blessed, because if you want to be blessed, you have to be obedient, right? See, I've set before you today blessings and curses, life and death. So blessings are synonymous with life. Agreed? Curses are synonymous with death, right? There's only one way that leads to life. It's a straight gate, it's a narrow passageway, and how many people find it? Few. But that one and only way that leads to life is synonymous with blessing. So if you want to be blessed, there's only one path that you can be on in order to be blessed. There's only one place that you can be in order to be blessed. So to be blessed is to live. Everybody still with me? And what kind of a path is it once again? Straight and it's narrow. Actually, that word can mean troublesome. So there's this straight, troublesome path, and it's the only path that leads to life. And because it's straight and because it's troublesome, most people don't want to get on that path. They would rather go the broad path, the one that seems more convenient, the one that seems right unto man. But what does that path lead to? To death and to destruction, which death is synonymous with curses. So there's only one place that God's people are to be, and that's where He said they're to be. Whether it's a path or whether it's the land of Canaan, He said there's a place that my people are supposed to be. And when they're there, there's something they're supposed to be doing. Living the way I ask them to live. We basically have only one choice to make in life. Of all the different things that we make choices over, where He's concerned, it really just boils down to one. That is, do you want to live or do you want to die? Do you want blessings or do you want curses? If you want to live, if you want blessing, then there's a place that you're supposed to be, and there's a way that you're to live. So then, when they're in the land and they're living the way He said to live, they would be blessed. They would prosper. If you keep my commandments, if you keep my covenant, then the land is going to produce. It's going to produce its fruit. The vineyards are going to produce. I'll give you rain in due season. You do what I ask you to do, and I'm going to prosper you. And if you do what I ask you to do, live according to my covenant, then I will keep your enemies at bay. They will not covet your homes. They will not covet your fields. They'll stay home. They'll bother somebody else, but they're not going to come and bother you. So if you are where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, you will be blessed. You will prosper. You will live in peace. And really, you'll live. So if they're in the midst of the nations, they're where they're supposed to be, that is in the land of Canaan. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that is keeping His instructions, living the way He said to live. Then they're going to be an example to the nations. And the nations will take note of that Israel is blessed. Israel prospers. Israel lives in peace. And I guarantee you there'll be some of those people that'll be wanting to get in on that if God's people are doing what they're designed to do. And you look on a map of when Israel first entered the land and it was allotted to the different tribes. Do you know which nations were right next door to them? Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So is it possible, folks, that one of the reasons that He tells them to leave those three nations unmolested is because if you're in the land of Canaan and you're living according to my covenant, you're doing what you're supposed to do and being a light, then those people right next door are going to see that you are light. They're going to see that distinction between clean and unclean, holy and profane. And might it be that there will be those among Edom, Moab, and Ammon that will come out of darkness into that light. What was that girl's name? Ruth. Where was she from? Moab. And what did she tell her mother-in-law? Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. Just so happened she was the great-grandmother of, what was that guy's name? David. And she was an ancestor of the Messiah Himself. So, for God so loved is not a New Testament concept. It's an eternal truth. And to propagate this truth throughout the world, the Creator has always worked through His people. And He called the people out of Egypt. He called the people out of the world to be a set-apart people, to walk a set-apart life. In Exodus 19, He said, you saw what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bore you unto myself upon eagle's wings. Now, if you will indeed hear my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Goy Kadosh in Hebrew. Set apart nation. But what's being inferred in all of that? If you do this, and you're set apart unto me, that's how the world's going to know that you belong to me. But that's also how the world is going to see the distinction between light and darkness, between holy and profane. That's what His people are to do. And we see that in these verses, chapter 4. So once again, they were to be in the land of Canaan. That was the particular place they were to be, in the midst of the nations, not hidden from the nations, but living right there amongst the nations, and yet set apart from the nations by their lifestyle, what they did, what they didn't do, what they celebrated, what they didn't celebrate, what they ate, what they didn't eat, etc. And thus they would become an example to those round about them. But also notice that when they decided to do things their own way, when they decided to do what was right in their own eyes, guess who was right next door just waiting to be used? to be a thorn in their flesh, to be a rod of chastening. Who was it? Edom, Moab, Ammon. And so you see, the Creator also sets His people in the midst of the nations to be a light to those nations. But when His people cease from being a light and start acting like those nations, then He raises them up to be His rod of chastening, not to destroy them, but to provoke them to return to Him, to return to His ways, and to function in their purpose. To live in the land, to be where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, I will submit to you, is equivalent to functioning in your purpose. Fulfilling your purpose. Now, we're going to come back to Deuteronomy in just a moment, but I want to go over to Genesis chapter 1 real quick. And we're going to go to Hebrew class here in just a minute. So many things that we could say about Genesis 1. We don't have the time today. But verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and choshech, darkness, was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. We pause there. A lot of people assume that darkness, in Hebrew choshech, is simply the absence of light. But that's not true. Because in Isaiah 45 it says that the Creator forms light, and I create darkness. Choshech. And so darkness is a created state. He created darkness. It's not just the absence of light. In fact, in Psalm 18, verse 11, I believe it is, it says that He makes choshech, darkness, His secret place. How many of you can quote Psalm 91, the first one or two verses for me? What does it say? He that dwells in the secret place shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. What does that tell me? That if you're going to abide under the shadow of the Almighty, that you're going to be in the secret place. Well, according to Psalm 18, verse 11, guess where that secret place is? In darkness. In choshech. See, it's real easy to serve Him in the light. It's real easy to serve Him when you understand everything. But it's difficult, it's challenging to continue to serve Him when you have no idea what's going to happen next. It's a challenge to continue to serve Him when you have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. You're in the dark about those things. There's more of Him, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to get off subject if I keep going down this trail. But there is more of Him that exists in darkness than there is in light. The universe is an example of that. Most of the universe is comprised of what is called by cosmologists dark energy. What is dark energy? Well, for sure, we don't know. But it comprises most of the universe, and we can't put it under a microscope and analyze it to tell us exactly what it is, but we can see and we can measure its effects. Therefore, we know it exists, even though we don't know what it is. However, I know what it is. You do too. You might not know you know, but you know. Because by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. And then the writer of Hebrews goes on, and I'll paraphrase, so that everything that we do see is comprised of something we can't see. And what is it that we cannot see? We cannot see the Word of God. Forever, O Lord, your Word is established in the heavens. So, choshech, darkness, is, I'm going to suggest, the biblical term that equates to the cosmologist term of dark energy, that which comprises most of the universe. Meaning that most of what we can observe in the universe and analyze and dissect and all those things, that's a very, very small fraction of what is actually in the universe. Meaning that there is more of Him that exists in what we can't see than in what we do see. Let me put it in very plain terms. How many of this book called the Bible, how many of you have got it all figured out? Let me see your hands. Nobody? Is there anybody out there that has discovered the more you learn, the less you know? Every day I learn more, and every day I realize I know less. In other words, there is more of Him that exists in darkness, so to speak, than there is in light. Are you following me here? So there is darkness before there's light. And the Spirit of God is present there in the darkness. He's hovering over the face of the waters. Now, second observation, we kind of touched on this earlier today. If you want to understand the end, you must understand first the beginning. Genesis, there's more prophecy in the book of Genesis than there is in all the other books combined. Genesis is kind of the seed out of which everything else comes. So when we look in and it says that there was darkness, etc., and then God said, let there be light, I want to suggest to you that that is not only an historical fact. It's not just a statement recording something that happened in the very beginning. It is that. But in addition to that, it is a prophetic statement. Because if you understand that the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end, that then in the beginning there's darkness first. And then out of that darkness He calls forth light by saying, let there be light. Right? What that implies to me is, because the end is the beginning is the end. If there was darkness in the beginning, there's going to be darkness at the end. But what is He going to do at the end? He's going to say, let there be light. What is our mandate? To be a light to the nations. And so what is He going to do? Out of the darkness, He's going to call forth light. And in my mind's eye, it's not in some far off remote corner of the universe that light appeared, but it was right in the midst of the darkness that He called forth that light. Arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Darkness shall be upon the nations, and deep darkness the peoples, or thick darkness, some translations render it. But the Lord will arise over you, and His glory shall be seen upon you, and kings shall be drawn to the brightness of your rising. So what does that tell me? There is going to be a time when the glory of the Lord is going to shine upon us. But when is that time? When there is darkness upon the nations and thick darkness, the peoples. It almost seems to say that in order for the glory of the Lord to be upon us, in order for that light to arise and shine, there must first be this thick darkness settling upon the nations. And how many of you agree with me that we live in a time when darkness seems to be settling upon the nations? Thick darkness upon the nations. I'm of the opinion that we may already be seeing that the Creator has sent them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie and be damned because they loved not the truth. That's an opinion. But I'm pretty firm in that opinion. So again, if there was darkness in the beginning, there will be darkness in the end. But just like the beginning, He will say, let there be light. And I believe that's what He's saying today. All right? Then it says, and God saw the light that it was, in Hebrew, tov, that it was good. And He divided the light from the darkness. I don't know how many Hebrew students we have in here today. How many of you are learning Hebrew? See your hands. A handful of people. The rest of you might as well get with the program. Because when we come into the kingdom, never mind. I will return unto the people a pure language, whereby they may call upon me with one consent. English is a mixed language, so it can't be that one. Tov. This is the word that's translated good. So He saw the light that it was tov. Now when we use our word good, well, just a moment ago I had a meal. That meal was very good. By the way, thank you, Oscar. The meal was good. I read a book the other day. It was good. Saw a movie. Oh, it was a good movie. What have you. We throw the word good around and we describe a movie, a meal, a book, what have you. But we'll also take that word good and we'll say, God is good. What's that next part? All the time. All right? So we'll use the same word that describes a meal, a book, a movie to describe the creator of the universe. And it just seems that there should be something that's set apart just for him. Well, that's because, in part anyway, because English is such a mixed, mingled language. But in Hebrew, pure Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, there are words that are set apart for distinct purposes. Tov doesn't mean good just in the way that you and I understand the concept of good. Tov actually is, well, something or someone is where they're supposed to be. And they're doing what they were designed to do. That's what Tov is. So remember that when they were in the land of Canaan, they would be where they were supposed to be. And in the land of Canaan, when they were living according to his instructions, statutes, and ordinances, they would be doing what they were supposed to be doing. And if that was the case, they would be functioning in their purpose. That would be Tov. They were where they were supposed to be, doing what they were designed to do. When he saw the light, he saw that it was Tov. It was where it was supposed to be, and it was doing what it was designed to do. By the way, this is not the sun. Sun doesn't come along till day 4 when he puts that light in a body. Wish I had time to plow there. I don't. Anyhow, he sees the light is where it's supposed to be, and it's doing what it's designed to do. Therefore, it is Tov. It is good. Now, if Tov is something, it's where it's supposed to be, it's doing what it was designed to do, if that's what good or Tov is, then what word would we use to describe something or someone not where they're supposed to be, not doing what they were designed to do? Opposite of good is bad, or what's another word? Evil. In Hebrew, the word would be ra. Ra. Boy, and this thing is on there. Ra. Evil. Wicked. Biblically speaking, folks, Ra is not limited to baby killers, devil worshippers, rapists, murderers. All the things that we identify as being evil. Biblically speaking, Ra, wicked, evil, is anything that's not where it's supposed to be. And it's not doing what it was designed to do. And that little box that we try to put evil into just got a lot bigger. Straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads unto life. How is the other path described? Broad, wide. See, we will at times, we'll try to make the path that leads to destruction narrow. Murderers, rapists, thieves, liars, baby killers, Satan worshipers, those kinds of things. That's evil in our culture. But that's a narrow path. We're narrowing it down. Messiah said it's a broad path. It encompasses a lot more than what we've imagined. And so once again, Ra is anything, anyone, not where they're supposed to be, not doing what they're supposed to be doing, not functioning in their purpose, not doing what He ordained them to do. If they go do their own way and even put on the vestments of doing what is right, it's still wrong. You're familiar with the story of the tabernacle in 1 Samuel, where Eli was the high priest and Hophni and Pinchas were his two sons? What were Hophni and Pinchas doing in the tabernacle every day? Abominable things. They were having relations with women at the door of the tent of meeting. They were taking the portions that belonged to God for themselves and taking whatever they wanted, doing whatever they wanted to do. So what they were doing was evil. They were called Bnei Belial, sons of Belial. And they did not know the Lord, the text tells us. But what did they wear to work every day? The priestly garments. So again, Ra, wickedness, is a lot more than what those blatant and obvious things that we like it to be, or like to make it. It encompasses a lot more. So then, if it is not being where you're supposed to be, not doing what you were designed to do, how important is it then that we be where we're supposed to be? doing what we're supposed to do, functioning in our purpose. How important is it? I heard pretty dang important back there somewhere. I would say this, it's life and death. Because you see, there's only one path that we're supposed to be on. And that's the one and only path that leads to life. And so if we're not on that path, which one are we on? What happens if salt loses its savor? It's good for nothing. It's useless. What happens to it? It's thrown out, and then what happens to it? Gets trampled underfoot. Is that what it said? Think about this. As His people, He's the seed of the woman, therefore we're called the remnant of her seed who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua Messiah. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to overcome the adversary by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and because we love not our lives even to the death. Right? We're supposed to, along with Him, because He has done it, put our heel on the head of the serpent, right? But when the salt has lost its savor, it's good for nothing. It's tossed out and it's what? Trampled underfoot. That's not where it's supposed to be. And who was He referring to when He was talking about salt? Us. So what was He telling us? Function in your purpose. Do what you were designed to do. Because if you don't do what you were designed to do, then, I hate to say it this way, but what good are you? What good are you if you're not doing what He designed us to do? What good am I if I'm not doing what He designed me to do? I didn't say it. He said it. It's good for nothing. And it'll be tossed out and trampled underfoot. And it'll end up exactly in the place that we would like to avoid being. Under someone else's foot. Under someone else's heel. What happens to a fig tree that for 3 years doesn't produce any figs? Why? Because it's not functioning in its purpose. It's not doing what it was designed to do. A fig tree is designed to produce figs. And if it's not going to produce figs, then get it out of the way. It's taking up space. What happens to a tabernacle that was designed to house the presence of the Almighty? But you've got priests having relations with women at the door of the tabernacle, or stealing what belongs to God and doing whatever is right in their own sight. What happens to that tabernacle when it ceases to serve its intended purpose? It's destroyed. What happens to a temple that was dedicated to the Most High and His presence filled it so that the priest could not stand to minister, but eventually it ceases to fulfill its intended purpose? What happens to it? The Babylonians, the folks next door, come and destroy it. Or the Romans later on. The point is, when something no longer functions according to its intended purpose, eventually, after much and many efforts to bring them back, to bring them into repentance, to bring them into line, to bring correction, but when it becomes apparent that they are resistant, they're not going to do this unless things get a little bit more intense, He takes those things out of the way, which leads me to this. What happens? What happened to the nation of Israel when they refused to repent, when they refused to listen to His prophets? What happened to the northern kingdom? Taken into exile and scattered throughout the world. What happened to Judah when they refused to listen to the prophets and allow correction to occur in their lives? Nebuchadnezzar came knocking. So then what happens to a nation when it no longer functions in its intended purpose? So let's say we have a hypothetical nation that was founded upon biblical principle, that the early framers of this nation, though they were not perfect men, but believed in perfect principles, wanted to establish a nation that in large part was based on the principles and concepts found in this Word, and as such that nation began to prosper. They began to be blessed, and they lived in peace, and they began to be very powerful, and they began to be a stabilizing force in the world, a beacon of light. One of their leaders even says something like, we're a city set upon a hill. And the reason is because with all the warts and flaws that this hypothetical nation would have had, nevertheless, there was a belief that this book contained perfect principles, and if we would be true to that, then He would bless us. But there comes a point in time in the life of this hypothetical nation that people are seduced into thinking that they are the ones responsible for the blessing of the prosperity, that it's their ingenuity and their brain power that has brought all this to pass. And that nation forgets where it really came from and what really brought it into this place and time, and thus ceases to serve its intended purpose. What would happen to such a nation? So then, again, how important is it that we function in our purpose? It's life, death. So now let's go back over to Deuteronomy. We're going to go to chapter 1. Every time I grab one of these things, they fill it to the top, don't they? Chapter 1, verse 19. So we departed from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness which you saw on the way to the mountains of the Amorim, as the Lord our God had commanded us. Then we came to Kadesh Barnea. Now, this is approximately 2 years after they left Egypt. So in other words, about 2 years after they left Egypt, they are now poised to go into the land of Canaan and possess it. 2 years. And I said to you, you have come to the mountains of the Amorim, which the Lord our God is giving us. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. And every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and of the cities into which we shall come. Notice they didn't say, let us go and search out the land to see if we are to possess the land. That's not what they requested. It was how we are to possess the land and of the cities into which we shall come. The plan pleased me well, Moses said, so I took 12 of your men, 1 man from each tribe, and they departed and went up into the mountains and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. They also took some of the fruit of the land in their hands and brought it down to us, and they brought back word to us, saying, it is a good land which the Lord our God is giving us. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. It is a land just like Moses told us it was. Except there's a few things that Moses didn't tell us about. And so he says, nevertheless, you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. Now my question there is, which command did they rebel against? To possess the land? Is that the command they rebelled against? All right. So the land is where they're supposed to be. Right? Living according to His statutes is what they're supposed to be doing in the land, right? Which is equivalent to functioning in your purpose, being a light to the nations. Agreed? So you know what they were rebelling against? Functioning in their purpose. It amounted to they refused to be a light to the nations. And what was fueling this refusal to be a light to the nations? Self-preservation. Fear, plain and simple. And so they rebelled against the commandment of the Lord, and you complained or you murmured in your tents. Notice they didn't murmur at the door of the tent of meeting. They didn't go up there face to face, so to speak, with God and complain. No, they went home and got in their tents when they thought nobody was listening, and then they were murmuring and complaining there. Some things don't ever change. Today it's just that we have Facebook. And they can go on their Facebook and they can murmur and complain. And they can get a website started up and hide behind anonymous and complain and murmur and do all these kinds of things to incite. But they were murmuring in their tents, thinking nobody's hearing us. But somebody was. And look at what they were saying. Because the Lord hates us, He has brought us up out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorim, to destroy us. Their perception of the Creator is that He hates them. So let's kind of walk this out. He hears their cries in Egypt. He sends Moses to deliver them. He causes plagues to be poured out upon Egypt so that not even a dog wags his head against Israel, sets that distinction between Egypt and between Israel. The hail is wiping out the fields of the Egyptians, doesn't touch the fields of Goshen. The locusts are destroying everything that the hail had left in Egypt, doesn't touch Goshen. The darkness descends upon Egypt. Men can't even go out of their homes, but in Goshen they have light. And then, of course, the firstborn of Egypt is struck down while theirs are saved because they trusted in the blood of the Lamb. So then He brings them out of Egypt with a high hand, and then He brings them to the sea. They camp by the sea, and everything's okay until Pharaoh shows up in the back. Now all of a sudden we've got a problem. Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us out into this wilderness to die? You remember the scene with Edward G. Robinson, right? He's going up to Charlton Heston. Yul Brynner's over there on the cliff, and Charlton Heston's there standing over the water, and Edward G. Robinson is leading the people in this. There were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out in this wilderness to die. Complaining already. And then Moses says, stand still and see the Yeshua of the Lord, the Yeshua, the salvation of the Lord. Because these Egyptians you see today, after today, you're no longer going to see them. Now, in Bill's authorized version, this is when Moses then turns around, away from the people, and goes, psst, what are we going to do here? Because if you read in Exodus 14, I believe it's verse 15, the Lord says to Moses and says, why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward. So apparently Moses was, hey, what are you going to do? We're surrounded, we're trapped, what are we going to do? And God says, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to go forward. And so in my mind's eye, that's when Moses goes, well, I would, but there's an ocean in front of us. I'm just thinking logically here, you know? All right, but see, here's what happened. They had no way of knowing, could not even fathom, couldn't comprehend that all the Creator had to do, according to Exodus 15, was with a blast from your nostrils, you have caused the deep to stand up in heaps, to stand up in piles. The Hebrew word conveys the idea of the waters were beginning to flee. So it's like He begins to breathe and the waters begin to flee. And then they stacked up in heaps, and the waters congealed in the midst of the sea. I don't have time to develop this, but it seems like what happened when He began to blow with that blast from His nostrils and the waters began to part and they began to flee away from the presence of the Lord, that they stacked up in heaps, and then the waters congealed right here in the midst of it, becoming ice, some commentaries say, holding back the rest of the waters and forming a wall for the children of Israel to go through. He just kind of extended that straight and narrow path they'd been on. And they walked through that sea. And then He brought them through that. And when they got thirsty, He gave them water from a rock. And when they got hungry, bread rained down from heaven. And He brought them to Mount Sinai, and He spoke with them and gave them His commandments. And He did all of that because He hated them. That's their perception, that He hates us. That's why He did all this to us. He's just been toying with us. He brought us out here because He really hates us. Have you ever observed that people will often accuse you of what they are guilty of? People will accuse others of what they are guilty of. Have you noticed that? It's like, to get political for just a second, it's like, all the tolerant people calling you intolerant. But how do they respond to you? How tolerant are they of you? So in my opinion, the tolerant crowd accuse us of being what they are guilty of. Well, I say that because the children of Israel are right here accusing God of hating them. And we know that's not true. So then, what is the possibility that they are accusing God of what they are guilty of? That their perception of Him is cruel, mean, and you did all this because you hate us, but that's not true. They're saying that because they really ain't crazy about Him. At one point, they will even say, you called us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. You have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. And what's going to happen to all of that generation? They're going to die. So now, let's continue to read. They said in verse 28, where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakim there. In Numbers, when this is, when the spies are giving the report, they said that we have seen those of the Nephilim, the giants. In other words, their problem is this. Yeah, it's a great looking place, but there's a problem. There's giants there, and there's fortified cities there. And what's the implication they're trying to get across to everybody? We can't do this. The obstacles are too big. We can't do this. So notice that their brethren discouraged their hearts. Now, there were 12 spies. 10 of them brought back an evil report. But why is it called evil when you consider this, that what they told the people was accurate? Did they tell the people a lie? Were there giants and fortified cities in the land? So did they give an accurate assessment of the situation? Then why is it called an evil report? Did they not instill fear in the congregation of the Lord? They told them the truth, but they had an agenda behind it. And that was they instilled fear in the people. So, I want you to think about this. It is possible for our brethren to give a correct assessment of what is going on in the world. But if that assessment is motivated by and results in fear taking hold of God's people to the point that they refuse to be where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing, if it's not Tov, then what is it? Ra. And therefore it's called an evil or a wicked report. And I want you to notice also that it did not come at the hands or the mouth of the world. It came as a result of our own brethren. But now there were 2 other spies. They saw the same things. They witnessed the same giants, saw the same fortified cities. But what was their response? We can do this. My servant Caleb has another spirit within him. And by the way, those 2 guys of all that generation were the only ones that got to go across into the land, right? Caleb went up to the top of one of those hills, you remember? And what did he do? He knocked that giant off the top of that hill. You see, the giants were formidable, they were intimidating, scary, whatever word you want to use, but they weren't indestructible. Did the giants keep the people of the next generation from inhabiting the land? They did not. Did the fortified cities keep the next generation from inhabiting the land? They did not. But notice that the next generation still had to face the giants in the fortified cities. God had not mysteriously and miraculously moved them out of the way before they got into the land. He actually left them there. So if they had come out of the land of Egypt, had gone straight into the land of Canaan, and they had seen war, guess what they would have had to face? Giants and fortified cities. And if 2 years after they came out of Egypt, they went into the land and saw war, guess what they would have had to face? giants and fortified cities. And then the generation 38 years after that, when they did come into the land to possess it, to be where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to be doing, guess what they had to face? Giants and fortified cities. Which means that if we are going to possess the land, if we're going to be where we're supposed to be, doing what we're supposed to be doing, functioning in our purpose, which is Tov, then sooner or later we're just going to have to make up our minds. We're going to have to face the giants and the fortified cities. And those who don't, do not possess the land. How many of you want to hear him say, when you stand before him, well, and a lot of things you did good, but I have a few things against you. Number one, when all this darkness came upon the land, you took that as your cue to hide your light rather than put it on a lampstand. Consequently, you were not where you were supposed to be. You weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing. Raise your hands if that's what you'd like to hear. Of course not. How many of us want to hear, well done, good, Tov, good and faithful servant? We all want to hear that. Well, if we all want to hear that, and I know we all do, there is a responsibility that goes along with that. And that means that we must be committed to, regardless of what the obstacles that are in front of us may be, we have to be committed that we're going to do what he said to do. We may do it scared, but we're going to do what he said to do, because our trust and confidence is not in ourselves and our abilities or to scheme and to plan and to prevent. Our trust and confidence is in him and in him alone. So he said to them in verse 29, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God who goes before you, he will fight for you according to all he did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son in all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet, for all that, you did not believe the Lord your God. And that's what it boils down to. They did not believe him. Now, they believed him for some things at certain points. They trusted him. When he said, put the blood of the lamb on the door, they trusted him that he would save their firstborn. Lots of them did that, but many of those people who trusted in him, or let me rephrase that, many of those who trusted in the blood of a lamb did not trust him to bring them into the land. Many of those same people did not trust him to fight for them when it came to facing the giants and the fortified cities. Think about it. Most of the people who trusted in the blood of a lamb died in a barren, remote wilderness because they did not trust him to finish what he had started. It's kind of a sobering thought, don't you think? Now, the two primary obstacles as they see it are giants and fortified cities. I'm going to kind of pick up the pace here a little bit. I want you to go with me to Genesis chapter 6. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to around 3, or try to shortly thereafter, which will be a couple of hours. And if you get tired, if your backside gets numb, if you need to stand up, that's not going to bother me a bit in the world. Just don't do calisthenics and all those kinds of things down in front, all right? But if you're okay with it, I'm just going to kind of keep going here. You do what you need to do. If you need to leave, that's fine as well. But I'm just going to kind of keep going so I can get just as much as I possibly can into this afternoon. Is that okay? Thank you very much. All right, Genesis chapter 6. Now it came to pass, verse 1. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, that daughters were born unto them, and that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were Nephilim, translated giants. The reason we have the word giants is from the Greek word, because the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. The Septuagint used the word gigantes here, from which we get giants. But the Hebrew word is Nephilim. So there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man upon the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is the genealogy of Noah. He was a just man, a tzaddik in Hebrew, a righteous one, literally. He was a tzaddik. When it says the steps of a good man, the Hebrew term is tzaddik. The steps of a tzaddik are ordered of the Lord. He was a just man, perfect. That Hebrew term, tamim, means he had not mixed and mingled. He did not have a blue bumper sticker on the back of his car that said coexist. He was set apart. He was perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth, verse 11, the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with Hamas, with violence. And so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. Why? For all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. All right, and so in those 12 verses, estimate how many times man, men, mankind, flesh, some synonymous term was mentioned. More than once? Twice? Several times? I think we counted the other night. It was like 13, 14 times, something like that. Okay? Now, count how many times in those 12 verses you find the word angel or fallen angel. How many? None. So now, we have a scale. In this tray, the number of times man, men, flesh, mankind is mentioned. In this tray, the number of times angel, fallen angel is mentioned. Which way does the scale tilt? It's not even close. So here's my reason for pointing this out. If I read these 12 verses, should I come away with the idea that the emphasis is being placed on angels or fallen angels and what they did, or should I come away with the emphasis is being placed on man, men, mankind, flesh, and what they did? It would seem kind of illogical to go with the other, wouldn't it? Considering they're not even mentioned. There's some people who believe they're implied. Okay, we'll get to that in just a moment. But just plain and simple, on the surface of the text, they're not mentioned, and therefore, why should I come away thinking that that is the emphasis? It seems to me very plainly the emphasis is placed on what men did, what mankind did. The earth was corrupt because all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. You see, and this is Bill's opinion. You don't have to agree. You can disagree if you want to, but I have the microphone, so you have to listen to me. All right? But I am not of the opinion that the sons of God are fallen angels, and that is the emphasis being conveyed to us here. Because if it's fallen angels mating with human women producing a race of giants, and I have no control over that, that is something that is totally out of my hands. And so the earth was corrupted and all this stuff happened because of all this crazy stuff that I have no control over. However, if it's not about that, if it's about what men did, then I can no longer deflect the responsibility off of me onto something I have no control over. Folks, most of the Bible is not speaking to the world. I know that what we've been trained to think, but most of the Bible, God is not addressing the world. Most of Scripture, God is addressing His people. And the point that He wants to get across to His people is quit acting like the world. He's not speaking to the tares, pleading with them to become wheat. He's pleading with the wheat to quit acting like the tares. Why? So that the tares will see the distinction between wheat and tares, that darkness will see the distinction between light and darkness. He divided the light from the darkness. So most of Scripture, He's not addressing those people out there, per se. He's addressing these people in here. Because if He gets the attention of the people in here and they are where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing, then those people out there will see light, will see what is holy, will see what is clean, and will be provoked, hopefully, to come out of darkness into light. And so again, I don't believe the emphasis here is being placed on something you and I have no control over, therefore we have no responsibility. It's coming at us. In fact, the sons of God being mentioned there is, I think, critical to understanding that the flood happened not so much because of what the tares did, but because of what the wheat did or didn't do. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves, seek my face, and pray, and turn from their wicked ways. And when he says wicked ways in regard to his people, well, I mean, what is he saying? Is he saying his people are baby killers and Satan worshipers and murderers and rapists and all this kind of stuff? Probably not. Because it's not the most obvious and blatant things, murder, rape, etc., that are the most common forms of wickedness. The most common forms are doing what's right in my own eyes and many times clothing it with the vestments of righteousness. Appearing to be good, but doing what is right in my own eyes. So, all of that is to say, I personally do not reside in the camp that believes that what's being conveyed to us here is how the giants got here, and that it was through fallen angels mating with human women producing this race of giants. There's many reasons I don't believe that. First of all, Greek or Western thought focuses on form. What does it look like? Describe it to me. How did it get here? But some of you know that Hebrew thought is the antithesis of that, because Hebrew thought doesn't focus on form but on function. What does it do? What purpose is it serving? Forget about how it got here. Doesn't matter how it got here. What matters is, what does it do? Number one. Number two, in verse 4 it says that there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also afterward. After what? The flood. Find flood in verse 4 for me. Found it yet? It's because it's not there. It says that there were giants or Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also afterward. After what? When the sons of God went into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. And so it tells me that there were Nephilim before the sons of God went into the daughters of men and cohabitated with them. And there were Nephilim after the sons of God went in and cohabitated with the daughters of men. And so then, if you have sons of God who are fallen angels mating with human women, producing a race of giants, how then do we account for the giants that existed before the sons of God went in and mated with the human? Now, that brings me to my point. The Nephilim are mentioned, and they're mentioned for a reason, because there's nothing superfluous in the Scripture. There's a reason that God had Moses mention the Nephilim. So let's not focus on form, but let's focus on function. What do they do? Well, I believe verse 4 tells us that they were the mighty men of old, men of renown. Well, some people think that that's the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Well, but the context of verse 4 is that there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. And so go with me and just consider that the Nephilim are the mighty men of old, men of renown, which is very important. There's only one other time in Scripture that the term men of renown is mentioned. And it's found in Numbers chapter 16, and is when Korah and 250 notable men, men of renown, lead a rebellion against Moses and against Aaron. And so, first of all, we want to see that these men of renown in number 16 are notable men. They're just not random men, they're notable men. They're men that are important in their tribe. They're important amongst their people. They are men of renown. And in Hebrew, the term for renown is shin, mem, which is pronounced shem, which literally means name. They are men of name. In Genesis chapter 6, it says the same thing, that they were the mighty men of old, men of name. And when we think of name, we think of Alvin or Joe or Sue or Carol or Bill or what have you, what you call somebody. But if I ask you your name and you told me your name, most of you could tell me your name, I could remember your name, I could pronounce it correctly, but I wouldn't know a thing about you. I don't know you. So I really wouldn't be able to tell anybody about you because I don't really know you, even if I could pronounce your name correctly. See, in the West, it's about what you call somebody. It's about form. But in the East, in Hebrew concept, it's about function. What are you? What's behind that name? Because a good name is something to be desired above gold and silver, Solomon wrote. Right? So it's not what you call them, it's what are they? What have they done? What kind of a track record do they have? So if you have a person that is trustworthy, who's reliable, who is honest, who has virtue and has integrity, and that has been displayed time and time and time again over time, then if that type of a person came to you and said, there's something I need to speak to you about that's very, very important, are you going to blow that person off, or are you going to listen to what they have to say? Because they speak with authority. When we say Shem in Hebrew, it's translated name, but it really means not so much what you call them, but what's behind them. The authority by which they speak. Messiah said, I have come in my Father's name, but you won't hear me, but another will come in his own name, and him you'll hear. What was he saying? I have come pronouncing my Father's name correctly, but you won't listen to me? No, I have come in my Father's authority. But another will come in his own authority, you'll listen to him. So when it says that these men were men of Shem, men of name, they were men of authority. And so if that's true, then I'm going to suggest to you in Genesis 6 that the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, men of Shem, are men of authority. And please notice it says men. Men of authority. Alrighty. Let's see if I can say this the right way without being too sarcastic. When Messiah talked about the days of his coming would be like the days of Noah, when men were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. On the surface, what does that tell us? That when the days before his coming, men are just going to be going around doing their routine things, what they've always done. They're not going to be paying attention to what's going on. They're just going to be eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. But I want to suggest to you that in addition to that, he was also alluding to something. He was also hinting at something. When we go back to the very beginning, and we see how the adversary operates, he does not come in a red suit and a pitchfork, right? He comes as an angel of light, posing as an angel of light. He comes appearing to be good, concealing his true intent. What does Esau do? He wears camouflage. He goes under the cover of darkness, sneaks into the woods, and waits for the prey to show up, right? He wants to blend into the environment. He doesn't want to alert the prey that they're in danger. Well, he inherited that from his father, the adversary. That's the way the adversary works. He wants to blend into the environment. He wants to coax you and seduce you into thinking everything's okay before he closes his trap. So when he comes to the woman and seduces her, it's with the fruit of a tree that is characterized as being both good and evil. Tov verah. Mingled. Mixed. And so he seduces her into eating the fruit of this tree. That's when she takes it to her husband, who's with her. He eats it, their eyes are open, and they're exiled from the garden. That's the way he operates from the very beginning. So when the Messiah says that they were eating and drinking, is it possible that he's alluding to the fact that at the very beginning, here's how the adversary coaxed people into mixing and mingling. It was food. Consider the sin of Baal Peor. Balaam could not curse Israel. 3 times he tries, 3 times he has to bless, because you can't curse what God has blessed. The adversary does not have that authority. But here's what the adversary is very good at. This is what Balaam does. He goes to Balak and says, I can't curse them, but if we can seduce them to mingle with notice it wasn't the homely daughters of Midian, but it was the beautiful daughters of Midian. If we can coax them to mix and mingle with them, then they'll do to themselves what we don't have the authority to do. They'll bring the curses upon themselves by their coexisting and cohabitating and mixing with the daughters of Midian. And that's exactly what happened. And according to the text, the daughters of Midian coaxed them into first a sacrificial meal, eating, then licentious behavior before they bowed down to the Baal of Peor. So again, when Messiah was talking about the days of Noah are like those days before his coming when men were eating and drinking, perhaps he was alluding to the fact that all the problems of the world started when Adam, who was called the Son of God in Luke chapter 3, ate something he wasn't supposed to eat, indicative of eating a mixed and mingled mindset, a mingled philosophy, a coexistent, tolerant mindset. And then he talks about marrying and giving in marriage. Perhaps he's, again, talking about people just going about their daily routine, but maybe he's also hinting that in Genesis 6, during the days of Noah, who are the only people mentioned who are marrying or being given in marriage? It's the sons of God going to the daughters of men. One of the instructions given to Israel in Deuteronomy 7 when they come into the land is do not give your daughters to their sons, nor let your sons marry their daughters. Why? Because they will bring their gods into your home, you'll bow down to their gods, and my wrath will be kindled against you, and I will have to spew you from the land. The days of Noah, ladies and gentlemen, are not just lackadaisical attitudes about life. That's not the entirety of it. What's being hinted at is the days of Noah were when men were mingling and mixing with things they weren't supposed to be mixing and mingling with. Now, I want you to notice what he doesn't say. This is where I'm going to try to choose my words very carefully. Notice he didn't say on the heels of that, eating, drinking, marrying, and giving marriage, and UFOs showing up in the sky. And angelic beings coming off those UFOs. And making overtures to human women to have relations with them in exchange for eternal life, and then producing a hybrid race of giants that are 20, 25, 30 feet high. I don't remember reading that. Did you? And I'd like to think that if that was something, that was the sign I would really supposed to be looking for, I would like to believe that he would say that. I'd like to believe that he would alert me to that, but he doesn't mention it. So now I want you to consider this also. Let's say that these guys were 15, 20 foot tall. Maybe that's what it's talking about, if we want to focus on form rather than function. So if that's the way it was in the beginning, then we should expect, and some people believe this, that there'll be 15, 20, 25 foot giants, Nephilim, walking around with sloped foreheads. Some people believe and teach they're going to walk around, they're going to eat people, do all these kinds of things. So if that happens, and if it happens, it happens. But if that were to happen, don't you think you'd notice that? I think I can spot a 20-foot dude out of a crowd. What about you? I can spot a 12-foot dude out of a crowd, right? You would notice that. My point, how does that compare with the way the adversary typically operates? It's the opposite of the way he usually functions. Because how does he operate typically? He wants to blend in with the environment. He doesn't want to stand out in a crowd. So it goes totally against the methodology of the adversary, as far as I'm concerned. So again, I personally am not convinced that the most important thing we take away from this in Genesis 6 is to be looking for these great, tall men. Okay, so again, then why does it mention them? Because if we focus on function rather than form, here's what I think we can glean from it. There were Nephilim. Nephal means to fall. Nephilim is the plural form. It means fallen ones. And so this enters into the idea that they're fallen angels. Notice they're not the sons of God, though. They're the Nephilim. Those are the fallen ones. But let's consider that the sons of God are exactly who they say they are. They're just the sons of God. And according to Paul in Romans chapter 8, the sons of God are those who are led by the Spirit of God. So let's allow the Scripture to interpret itself. And let's just say that the sons of God are those who up until this point in time have been led by the Spirit of God. But something happened. They begin to see these, notice, not homely, but beautiful daughters of men. So once again, there's something looks good that's intended to attract and to bedazzle and to seduce. And if the adversary is going to try to seduce somebody, is he going to seduce the tares? Or is he going to seduce the wheat? If he's going to try to get somebody to fall, is he going to try to get the people who have already fallen? Or is he going to try to get the people who are still standing upright? What do you think? So in other words, who is he going to be coming after? The sons of God. And so there are Nephilim in the earth in those days. These were the mighty men of old, men of authority. So I want you to consider, what are you most likely to encounter in your lifetime? 12-foot, 15-foot, 20-foot men walking around threatening you to kill you, or men of authority who use that authority to coax, seduce, manipulate, coerce, force, legislate, create an environment that is designed to get you to mix, to mingle, to coexist, to believe that all the things that you have believed up until this point in time are old, antiquated, and archaic, can no longer stand under the scrutiny of enlightenment, that we have evolved past all of that. And yes, we believe this, but we also believe in the Quran, and we believe in the writings of Buddha, and we believe in the Hindu religion. We believe that all these paths will take us to a higher being, but that we too are evolving, and we have to come to the place that, well, we can't really believe that when he said that homosexuality is an abomination, we can't really accept that in our day and time because we've evolved beyond that. We can't really accept that when Yeshua or Jesus says that unless you come through me, you can't come to the Father. We can't accept that because that will offend this one and that will offend that one. And we want to all come together and be one great big happy family and coexist with one another. And so it started out just seducing, coaxing, challenging, but now it's becoming, we're going to legislate it. And who's doing all of this? Who's enforcing all of this? I want to put it to you this way. It's men of authority. Whether it's political authority, whether it's they're entertainers and they use that kind of influence, whether it's financiers, people who have money and they use that kind of power and influence. It's because when you've got corporations threatening the Boy Scouts of America, we're not going to fund you anymore unless you allow homosexual leaders in your organization. That's men of authority creating an environment of mixing and mingling and coexistence, forcing the quote-unquote sons of God to mix and to mingle. So what are you most likely to encounter? What do you think? So it seems to me, ladies and gentlemen, the Nephilim are already here. You know what? If giants show up, so be it. But did giants keep Noah from building the ark? Noah didn't even mention them. What does it say of Noah? That he was building the ark, he and his sons, but what was he also doing? He was a preacher of righteousness. He was where he was supposed to be, and he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. And guess what? The giants didn't stop him. If there were fortified cities, they didn't stop him either. He did what he was commanded to do, and he did it faithfully. And how many of you today are thankful for Noah's obedience? If you're breathing, you should be thankful for his obedience. And consider this, his obedience had ramifications for people he would never meet. It wasn't just about him and his family. You see, sometimes we can get the idea, well, there are people who are of the mindset right now, because of all the darkness that's descending upon the land, that I need to just start thinking about me and mine, get my stuff, and hightail it to some remote place, get off the grid, fly under the radar, hunker down till the smoke clears, just me and mine. How many of you are thankful for Noah's obedience? Okay? What I'm saying is, it's crucial, not just for me, not just for my wife, not just for my children, but for people I have never met, that I be where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's just as crucial that you do that too. And then when these things like the giants and fortified cities rear their head, what have we been told? That we have been given the authority to do what? Trample on scorpions and serpents. The fortified cities and giants did not prevent the children of Israel from possessing the land. Those who trusted in Him, right? Because in the end, He's the one who fights the battle for me. And so all of this is either the truth, He will do what He said He will do, or it's not. It can't be in between. It's the truth or it isn't the truth. And if it's not the truth, I'm going home. But I believe it's true. And I'm staking my life on it. And I know you are as well. But ladies and gentlemen, we are coming into a time and a place where I believe, anyway, that the giants and the fortified cities have shown up. And some are being intimidated by the giants and fortified cities. The men of authority are already here. And let me say this before I forget to do it. Where do they derive their power and authority from? Politically speaking? Let's put it this way. In this last election, and the one before that, for that matter, if you were to look at a map of the United States, county by county, red representing Republican, blue representing Democrat, and I'm not here to be an advocate or an opponent of either one. I'm just stating the facts. That if you were to look at that county by county map, you will see that this huge swath of red, except for these little dots of blue in the more populous areas, cities. If you take it state by state, and what I did was I looked at the so-called swing states, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Nevada, some of those, Virginia, some of those other states, every state. And actually, some of the states that weren't even considered swing states, California, Oregon, that they knew were going to go into the Democratic column. But looking at them county by county, here's what you see. Ohio, for instance, red. Totally red, except Cincinnati, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, Cleveland. Cities. Pennsylvania, red, except for Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Scranton, Erie, Pittsburgh. Cities. Florida, red, except for Tallahassee, Miami, Broward, that area, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tampa, St. Pete, Gainesville, the University of Florida. Cities. Oregon, all red, except for Portland, Salem, those areas. Cities. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, those, politically speaking, who are in authority today are in authority primarily because of cities. And those who are of the so-called conservative camp have written the cities off. They've written them off, more or less, because they're so deeply entrenched in the other camp that they won't bother too much with that. In other words, fortified cities. And as a result of those cities and the mindset of those cities, and it does percolate outward, I understand that. And this is, again, this is not being an advocate for the Republican Party, because I'm madder at the Republican Party than I am the Democratic Party, quite frankly. Because at least the Democratic Party has been consistently for all the things that they're for. And with the Republican Party, generally speaking, I don't think they can make up their minds what they want to do. That's just how I feel about it. But I'm, again, not here to be political. I'm really trying to present this in an apolitical way. But the point is, these things are going on in our country, and I'm of the opinion that the men of authority, politically and otherwise, are there more or less because of cities. In other words, the same things that was facing the children of Israel when they went in to possess the land, to be where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to be doing, are the very things, yes, slightly different look to it, but nonetheless the same concept, the same principle, the same things are facing you and me today, and they're passing laws, and they're forming opinion, and they're creating an environment that is becoming increasingly difficult for you and me to stay true to what this book believes, to the point that now there is law that says, we don't care if you believe this certain way. The law of the land is this. You do what we say. And if you're a company that the owners of the company believe that abortion on demand or what have you is wrong, well, that's too bad. The law of the land is, if you don't comply, we're going to fine you millions of dollars every day until you do bow down. Either bow down or die. That's where we're at. Not something that's coming, folks. Something that's here. So why am I telling you all this? Because 3,500 years ago, children of Israel, when all this popped up, and they saw it as an impossible obstacle to overcome in order to do what they were called to do, to be what they were called to be, they fled. They backed off. They all died in the wilderness. Paul writes for us in 1 Corinthians 10 that, and I want to paraphrase, that these things happened to them as examples unto those of us upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And so it encourages us not to make the same mistakes they made. And what was at the core of their problem is they didn't trust Him. They didn't believe that He could finish what He had started. And so again, he admonishes us not to repeat those same mistakes. Don't make the fatal error that they made in not trusting Him. It says that many complained, and they were destroyed by the destroyer. Because they complained, which is ironic because the destroyer was the one who had to pass by their homes when the blood was on the door in Egypt. They placed their trust in the blood of the Lamb. Then the Lord passed over their homes and the destroyer had to pass by. But in the wilderness, those same people complained because they didn't trust Him to finish what He had started. And they were destroyed by the very destroyer that had passed by them before. So Paul encourages us, don't make the same mistakes those people made. Learn from their mistakes. And if the primary reason they refused to go into the land was Nephilim, men of authority, and fortified cities, and if we can see those things rising up before us in this day and time, then ladies and gentlemen, now is not the time for us to shrink away. Now is not the time for us to be intimidated. Now is not the time for us to run and hide. Now is the time for us, as never before, to shine. We are a city set upon a hill. And that city is not to be hidden. You don't tunnel under the hill to try to hide the city. It's where He wanted it to be. It's in a conspicuous place so that all can see, even those who would love to destroy it. But I have to believe that if He has placed us here, if He's brought us into the kingdom for such a time as this, then that means there's something within each and every one of us that He is going to use or wants to use in this day. And you know what? for some, it may mean that they give their lives. There are those who overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they love not their lives even to the death. Even if He doesn't require that of me, I still have to be of a mindset that I am willing to go to that extent if that's what He has ordained. Because in the end, it's not about what I want, and it's not about what you want. It's not about what we would rather things be. It's not about holding on to things that, frankly, have to come to an end in order for His purposes to be fulfilled. If we're going to truly serve Him, like the way I know we all want to, then we have to come to the same place Yeshua came to. And He said, what? Not my will, but your will be done. In fact, He even prayed, if it were possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. That's what it's going to take. If we are where we think we are, that's what it's going to take. The commitment level of the past, this goes for you, goes for me, goes for us all. The level of commitment that we've been at in times past, I dare say, will not be sufficient for the days that are ahead. We're going to have to die to ourselves even more so than we have in times past. But the Father, as He allows these things to arise, these obstacles to come up, and these things that seem to be so intimidating, so fearful, He's not surprised by any of it. In fact, He's allowed it all. And if He's allowed it, it is in our best interest if we will follow Him, if we will hear His voice, and will be obedient to Him. Before the election, I had, resolved in my heart that whoever won the election this past time to be president, well, let me just say this, that I wasn't real enthused either way. But I certainly had some issues with one candidate over the other. Of course, I could find some other issues with the other guy, too. So I wasn't real thrilled either way. But I'd resolved in my heart that whoever won the election was God's man. And by that, I do not mean a man of God. But I mean God's man. Because of Nebuchadnezzar, he said, he is my servant. But what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He destroyed Jerusalem. He burned the temple to the ground. He carried off temple treasures into the house of his God and placed them there. And yet God, the God of Israel, calls him my servant. He was God's man. The Pharaoh who arose in Exodus chapter 1, who didn't know Joseph, who began the process of enslaving the Hebrews, guess what? He was God's man. He wasn't a man of God, but he was God's man. He allowed that to happen. But in any case you want to look at in Scripture, God never allowed it to happen in order to destroy His people. He always did it in order to provoke His people to return to Him with their whole heart. And before it's all said and done, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come forth from that fiery pit, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, in a manner of speaking, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, your God is God. And Babylon, the king of Babylon, never professes that if those men had not been where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to be doing. And note, where they were supposed to be apparently was in a pit of fire. What were they doing? Well, they were walking with that fourth man in the fire. And as a result, Babylon has to confess that the God of Israel is God. See, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that He is Lord. And so I'm convinced in my heart that whether I like it or not, personally, politically, the man who occupies the White House is God's man, not that I believe he's a man of God. And so consequently, I do not believe that the election turned out the way it did because there were about 3 million plus people who didn't vote in the previous election cycle. I don't believe that has nothing to do with it. That may be a flesh and blood manifestation, but it's not the cause. I do not believe that he's in office because of hanky-panky, even though there was probably hanky-panky going on. I don't believe that's what accomplished the result. I'm more inclined to think, well, for instance, when you've got a hurricane that forms at a very odd time of year, and it makes its way up the eastern seaboard, and then makes a hook and goes inland in some of the most populated areas of the country, and then as a result, 4 out of 10 people polled say that the hurricane and the aftermath and the president's response to it actually affected their vote, then I have to ask the question, who was it that orchestrated that hurricane? Oh, it was the adversary. Oh, they did it through HARP. Okay, so what? Who allowed it? Who didn't stop it from going where it did? I'm saying that the Creator orchestrates things. Even when the adversary is seemingly let loose to do whatever it is he wants to do, he's still on a leash. He doesn't get to do anything the Creator doesn't want him to do. It's true with Job. He allowed him to do this, he allowed him to do that, but he said, you can't cross that line. So I'm convinced that we have a political situation because it serves the Creator's purpose. Really, I believe what it is the people want flesh. He says, okay, I'm going to give you flesh until it's coming out your nose. He's going to give the people what they want to demonstrate it is not what you need. Again, we have a situation that the Creator is allowed. But why? Remember I told you earlier that when Esau lost the blessing to Jacob and Isaac said Esau is going to live by his sword, and that when you are aggrieved, Esau, that you will break his yoke from off your neck. And so if there have been 2 Americas, and as I shared with you earlier, for the most part, Esau, so to speak, has been suppressed. That yoke has been on him. And those who would represent Jacob, if you will, the morals, the standards, the principles of this word have kept those other inclinations in check for the most part. Well, now it seems that Esau has been aggrieved. It seems that those standards and principles and virtues that have kept those other inclinations in check for so long, somehow or another that's all been toppled or is being toppled, is being undermined, which tells me that Jacob has not been walking worthy of the birthright and blessing. That Jacob has been walking more like Esau than he has Jacob. And so now Esau is being allowed to break the yoke from off his neck. And now remember how Esau works. He knows trapping. He knows how to set a snare. He's really, really good at it. And he goes about it by being very stealthy, blending into the background, into the environment, not wanting to alert the prey that they're in danger. And he will present himself as being something that he really isn't. As you see, when you have a large majority of the population who exist in a Laodicean mindset, neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, mixed, mingled that is, then you cannot discern clean from unclean, holy from profane. You will call good evil and evil good. Lo and behold, that's exactly what we have today. And I would also add this, it is being advocated, endorsed, supported by men of authority. So then, I'll leave you with this thought. Well, actually, no, there's 2 thoughts. After this last election, the Newsweek magazine had a picture of the president. It was an artist's rendering of the president, and he was wearing a Napoleonic-type uniform. I don't know if you saw it or not. But he was wearing this Napoleonic-type uniform, and in his hand he had a sword. And the title on the front of the magazine was this: Obama, Master of the Game. And I just looked at that and thought, boy, that's very interesting. And especially considering what Esau is good at. And remember, Isaac preferred him because game was in his mouth. And you may think this is crazy, and maybe it is, but his head blocked out the S of Newsweek. And so it said New Week. And I thought, well, either that is just a great big coincidence, or the Creator is trying to get something across to us, to those who are listening. That it is a new time. And if it were not that we have our hope in Him, it would be very depressing. It'd be a very dismal time. It would seem hopeless. But I have to come back to this, that nothing has taken my Father by surprise. To the contrary, He has either orchestrated or has allowed all the events that have led us up to this point. And if Esau is being allowed to break the yoke from off his neck and will be given an opportunity to put the yoke on Jacob's neck, all of that is to serve that yoke is going to send Jacob to his knees. Not to his demise, but to his knees. Because when Jacob gets on his knees and starts calling out to the Father in heaven, if my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves, seek my face and pray, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear, I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. It is not in order to destroy, it is in order to restore. So all of that leads me to this point. And I will close. Messiah said, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And on the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring. You may think this is crazy, but the track of that hurricane called Sandy, when it came up the eastern coast, and then it turned into New Jersey and New York, and then it turned like this, it made a perfect lamed. The Hebrew letter called lamed. And lamed is related to the word lomed, which means to teach. And the idea pictographically is that lamed is a shepherd's goad. You see, when the sheep get off the path, what does the shepherd do? He goads them. And sometimes it hurts. But he goads them back onto the one and only path they're supposed to be on. Because that's the one and only path that leads to life. So he said, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and from the anticipation of the things that are coming upon the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. But when you see these things beginning to happen, look up, lift up your head, and see how many black helicopters you can count. Count chemtrails in the sky and go on Facebook and tell everybody about it. Right? Why don't you when you see these things begin to happen, then you document all the FEMA camps, where they're at, how many guillotines they have, how many body bags they're sending in there, how much ammo that all these different agencies are buying. That's not what he said for us to focus on, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't say that when you see these things begin to happen, he didn't say try to figure out who the Antichrist is. I mean, how many of you are old enough to remember when Henry Kissinger was the Antichrist? Is anybody? I don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think he's the guy. I remember not long after Henry Kissinger, it was Anwar Sadat. Does anybody remember that? Anwar Sadat was the Antichrist because he was making a peace treaty with Israel. Then they shot him. But for 3 days, people were waiting with bated breath to see what was going to happen. He's still dead. Then it was Juan Carlos, president of Spain. Some of you don't even know who that is. But he was the Antichrist at one time. Then it was Ronald Reagan. It was Mikhail Gorbachev because he had that thing on his forehead. I don't think that's going to happen either. And it's the Pope. And then it's that Pope. And then it's the next Pope. Then it's the next Pope. And then now it's Bashar Assad. Or some people even say it's Obama. I don't know. I don't really think that's what I'm to be focused on. Because Messiah said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your head. And what is the inference? Get your eyes on me. Why? Because your redemption is at hand. It is not your destruction that's at hand. It's your redemption that's at hand. And so, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Darkness shall be upon the nations, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory shall be seen upon you, and kings will be drawn to the brightness of your rising. Amen? God bless you for coming out here today. I certainly hope it was worth your while. I appreciate your time, your patience, and attention. Bless you.